This is the Iron Sharpens Iron movement, sharing insights into the power of people-centric leading.
Hi, this is Jim, and today we welcome to our tribe a retired U.S. Navy SEAL officer, a graduate of the University of Texas McCombs Business School, and now a leadership instructor, speaker, and strategic advisor to Echelon Front. He served 15 years as an officer in the SEAL teams and 5 years as a U.S. Marine Corps enlisted recon Marine scout sniper. He's the recipient of the Silver Star, 6 Bronze Stars, and the Purple Heart. He currently serves as CEO of Echelon Front Overwatch, a company that specializes in recruiting, training, and placement of U.S. Special Operation Forces veterans with companies seeking leaders with an extreme ownership mindset. This is Mike Sarraille. Iron Sharpens Iron movement is brought to you by N2 Growth, a leader in executive search, leadership development, and talent management. We find and develop the world's best leaders. Learn more about our practice by visiting us at n2growth.com or click on the link in the show notes of this podcast. Hey, Mike, welcome to the Iron Sharpens Iron movement. I know our tribe's really excited to have you here, and you are someone that's passionate like us about human-centric leadership and about the power of leading. And it's more than just the art and science, and we're going to be a thrilling conversation for close to an hour, I think, with you today, and really looking forward to it.
Jim, happy to be here. Thank you for having me on.
You know, so Mike, one of the things I'd love to put in context, I guess, is a little bit about yourself. Not only, we read the bio and understand all about your military time, but what was your mindset? First question I want to ask you is, what is your mindset when you're getting out of the service and you're debating on what do you do next? And I can tell you're the type of guy that wasn't just like, hey, I want to go and be a contractor and I want to go and do the exact same thing. You went out after an MBA. What drove you into that? And how did you get into McCombs Business School? That's no easy task.
So great questions. I'll sort of take them in order there. Let me start with McCombs. Let me just say I called in a lot of personal favors.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I was in a time crunch a little after my 18-year mark in my 10th combat deployment. I just sort of I needed a period of to recharge. And I got orders to Austin, Texas. And knowing that I was going to Austin, Texas, and that UT had the McCombs Business School, I got my application in just before the deadline. And some great people lined me up with some of the key leaders there. And they made the decision that ultimately, hey, we'll take a shot on this guy. It was an interesting experience because I was the old man.
Oh, man.
The class. Yeah. I think the average age was 27 at the time. I was 30, 38. But I'll tell you what, humbling in the degree of talent I was surrounded with and how smart. I say kids, those young men and women. I think I learned as much from them as I did the professors because they had some private sector experience. Some were CPAs, and so I got a lot more from my classmates to squeak by my MBA program. But Jim, I'll make the story short. What did I want to do with my career as I transitioned? I would like to tell you I had a good answer, but I didn't. So I based my initial assessment off of what I knew. And what I knew was going to these Navy SEAL Foundation events, which is a great organization that helps not only the SEALs and all the support personnel that support those SEALs, but as well as their families. And a lot of the benefactors that attend these events, I sort of put in 3 buckets: investment banking, private equity, and venture capital. And so that's what I was exposed to. And so naturally, when I started my MBA program and they asked me what I wanted to be, I said, I think I want to be an investment banker, a private equity guy, or a venture capital. And after my first semester, I put myself on sort of a self-declared finance track. I looked in the mirror and said, what the hell are you doing? And I was not playing to my strengths. And so I sat down and I took my own personal assessment of subjective and objective skills in order to align with something that plays to my benefit. And it was entrepreneurship. And so after my first semester in the MBA, as if I didn't have enough work with that MBA program by also being an ROTC instructor, to the next generation of leaders. I said, hey, I'll start a foundation for vets because I think I can solve this transition dilemma. And
Oh my gosh.
took on way too much work. I stood up something called the Vetted Foundation, which eventually Huffington Post hailed it as having the potential to revolutionize how veterans exit the military. It was for more senior leaders such as yourself and myself with full careers. But what it was I set up a mini MBA, not to address the leadership component. These vets already have that. These military leaders already have that. It was to give them the business acumen in a short period and then actually help them get jobs. The first pilot program we ran was highly successful, and the metrics were standout amongst the nation. Of the 25 vets, 6 startups, and then also I think the average starting salary was $97,000, which is
awesome,
higher than some MBA students.
So what drove you to that, though? I mean, when there seems like there's 1,000 transition services out there. There seems like there's a lot of white noise on the transition. All these TAP programs, all these people with great intentions, right, to help transitioning service members. What was the niche? Was it just that the senior leader kind of level? Was it just the business acumen focus? What did you see that was really missing out there from the tens of transition services that are offered?
Yeah, you know what? I didn't have a good answer. So what I did was I went to the dean and said, hey, I'd love to do a research project. And I'd love to pull in 20 veterans who've already raised their hand. And we got 4 credits for it. So the research was really led by a guy named Chris Gerbis, an amazing human being, an amazing leader. West Point, then went to BCG after his time at McComb, and then runs operations for Southwest Airlines. But he was really strong in the data. We did a lot of research into the systemic challenges facing veterans. And we all are aware of those. There's definitely some prejudice. There are definitely some perceptions. But as a whole, we did have a lot of veterans. I think over 500 veterans take a financial intelligence test, and their business acumen or finance acumen was low, which is not surprising. It's just not the truth.
Right.
We
exactly
would
right.
be successful. So if we could bridge that gap, then who wouldn't hire these leaders who basically have a PhD in leadership? I mean, the one thing, and some people get upset at me when I say this, MBA programs don't produce leaders. They produce business practitioners. There is one preeminent leadership development program in the world. And if corporations could mimic this, they would. But that program is called the U.S. military. That is our job.
Right.
That is what we do for a living. We produce people that are tactically sufficient, but overwhelmingly great leaders as they step onto the battlefield to face very asymmetric challenges.
Absolutely. It's so interesting to see some of these latest trends about, how they're trying to find people with high agility and all these different leadership traits. And really all they have to do is look at the greatest leadership production that's out there, which is the U.S. military. It's kind of interesting. I don't know if you're familiar with that Deloitte study that came out last year. They asked a question on the status of leadership and leadership development. They asked a question to CEOs. They said, do you have the current talent on board in your organization to execute your current strategy? And 80% of the CEOs that were surveyed said they didn't have the talent that was required to execute on their strategy. That's shocking, right? And it was all based off of leadership. It wasn't off of their subject matter expertise. They didn't have the leaders within their organization to execute out on their strategy. It's shocking that it's like that. And then all you have to do is turn to the military, to where they are pumping out leaders all day long. It's just an amazing dynamic that's out there today.
So yeah, I'm familiar with that study. And yeah, the number one concern of CEOs is how do we attract, develop, and retain talented people? I mean, it comes down to this sort of equation right here: talent plus leadership. And when I say leadership, that's not only physically leading your people, but developing your people to their fullest potential. But if you have talent plus leadership, you will be victorious. We have a leadership deficit in this nation, which is to say we have a talent deficit in this nation. And I know you use the term the military is pumping out leaders, that process to create that process to create leaders, the military has honed that over the last 2 centuries. Even within
Absolutely.
the operations community where we both serve, we're still pretty young as a organization, but the amount of effort and money and time that they've put into what they call the assessment and selection process, what the business world would refer to as the hiring process, they put a lot of time and effort. That thing is continually evolving. And when they have a miss, let's say somebody makes it through the SEAL pipeline and does something unethical, it's like a punch in the gut to the organization. And they will look at the data at that individual and they will go back to the initial assessment and selection saying, what did we miss about this individual? And then they'll make the necessary changes as they screen the next generation of leaders.
So I know you focus a lot on special operation forces and that level of talent. What are some of the inherent qualities of SOF members that you see across the board? Doesn't matter what service, whether you're a Navy guy, Army guy, Air Force guy, doesn't matter. But if you're in special operations, what are some of those inherent qualities that you see a person that's starting to exit from the military, something that is brought into them not only inherently as a part of their personality, but is developed? What are those qualities that are really shined out there from a SOF member?
Yeah. So, Jim, for the group listening, we run a company called EF Overwatch, and it's a very specialized executive search firm for military leaders. The preponderance of our talent pool is SOF. I think that's just by nature of having served alongside my 2 partners in the SEAL teams and in the joint community. But there's a guy named Dr. Carol Green. He was a colonel in the Air Force, a industrial organizational psychologist by nature. But I love how he describes special operations, because you have the Navy SEALs, you got the Rangers, the Green Berets, Air Force Pararescue, and CCT. You've got all these amazing communities. People always ask, like, well, what's the best one? And the way he describes it is, it's like looking at ice cream. They're all ice cream, but they have their slightly different flavors. All the communities basically assess for very similar things. And what we boiled it down to was 9 attributes. And I'll rattle through them. One is drive, resiliency, adaptability, humility, integrity, effective intelligence, curiosity, team ability, and emotional strength. And these communities try to assess these people. They're really looking for those attributes. And people think we just throw people into the water to make them nervous or to stress test them. It is correct, but there's a methodology behind that. We're not sadistic people that just like to see people in pain. No, there's a why behind everything we're doing. We're looking for certain attributes to come out. And during special operations training, the reason we push people to the edge is because it is at one's limits that true character and true attributes reveal themselves. But there are 9 attributes. Is somebody going to have all 9? No, they're not. And different communities put more emphasis on different attributes than others. But you look at a special operations leader, this is the best way for companies. We used to, we've gotten away from a term, a general manager, general management, because we've over specialized a lot of roles in the private sector, which is unfortunate. The power of the general managers, and you go back to the old days of PepsiCo and Johnson and Johnson and GE, where they all had these junior officer programs. The strength of general managers, especially these special operations guys or military leaders as a whole, is they have such a broad base of experience. And somebody with a broader base of experience is much more equipped to deal with a wide range of problems. Look at COVID and what's going on right now. There are a lot of people, a lot of leaders in the private sector who've never really dealt with something this extreme are running around like chickens with their heads cut off. But to a military member that maybe served in the global war on terror, they shrug their shoulders and they just start looking for solutions, or they start collecting as much intelligence of what's going on in order to make small iterative decisions. They are totally equipped for these type of environments to lead through the challenges that companies are currently facing.
Do you think a part of that incubator for these humans, these soft operators, is the team dynamic? How much does the team dynamics play into the individual actions at the end?
So one of those 9 that I rattle off, the second to last one, was what we call team ability. This is why the military is so successful. And I wish the private sector could really, really hone in on this. We look, when we screen, let's back up. When somebody goes through boot camp or officer candidate school, we strip them of their identity. Everyone has their head shaves. If you're a woman, you have to pin your hair back. It has to be a certain length. You wear the same baggy camouflage uniforms with the same shoe. Everything is the same. That's intended to strip you of self and to start building you around a team. And what is amazing about veterans is that very few humans have this ability. They have the ability to put their self needs aside for the overall good of the team. They can put their selfish desires to the side so that the entire team wins. So if you ask if team ability is, or being a team player is paramount, it's paramount in any endeavor we undertake. Even if, let's say, you're playing a singular sport like wrestling, you're part of a team that's moving towards the overall goal of winning on points. Everyone's contributing. Even individual contributors, ICs, contribute to a win. And I actually, as a leader, and I'm not exactly proud of this, when I had subordinate leaders under me that were totally about themselves, because we still, even though we have a great leadership development program, it doesn't stick with all military veterans.
Sure. It's called the 10% rule.
So I would hone in on them, and I would apply the pressure until they either got on board or we weeded them out. But I have this allergic reaction to selfish people.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And don't you find it amazing too? Like when you have this spirit of being a team member and understanding the power of team and the value of team, that it actually, and this is why, most military people are great global citizens. They're always serving in the community. They're giving back, not only within the military community, the communities they live in. Even if a military member is by themselves, they're not in a team environment, they're either a single shingle, entrepreneurial. They tend to be, I'm being very generalistic here, but I think from this team spirit kind of discussion is, they'll see the value of the mailman, the value of the garbage collection service, the value of, the linemen that are keeping the electricity on, all of those things. They see it because they see it through the eye of the team. There's a whole, no one is more powerful than the other. It's the whole of the team that makes them powerful. And I find that refreshing and one of the most precious things that I value as a retired member of the military.
You know what, Jim? There's a book that I think every American should have to read. I also have a second belief that all our politicians have to go through extreme ownership training, but that's probably not going to happen. But I nominate Jocko Willink to go give them a dose of humility so they start working together. Sebastian Younger, who's an amazing author, wrote a book called Tribe. And it should be required reading at a minimum for veterans getting out. But I had an opportunity to speak with him in San Francisco. And I don't want to put words in his mouth because I've been blown up a couple of times and things seem to distort as I get a little bit older. But we can talk about how, the high PTSD and high suicide rate amongst veterans is also from the lack of a tribal nature within our communities today. When you come from a community where quite literally people will give their lives for each other back to the United States where everyone's squabbling and it's so divided that there's such a barrier to reassimilate with your fellow civilians that a lot of veterans can't overcome that. And that actually makes sense to me. And, especially where we expect our leadership to be the great, and I'm not going to get on a pedestal here, but where we expect our leadership to be the best in this nation, we see the complete opposite. And that's both sides of the aisle. And it's disturbing to me that there's no civility and there's no sense of national pride that, hey, we're all in this together. And even if you multiply this country's problems by 5, we're still the best country in the world.
Oh, amen to that. But you're right. Right in our current situation, we're rudderless. We are traveling in no direction right now, and that's disheartening. I think for everybody, right? And then it just allows the chaos that is naturally percolating up. But I'll tell you, back to the PTS situation, it is an amazing thing about the feeling of a tribe and belonging and all that. I tell everybody this anytime I'm in a new conversation and they're like, what did you do? What are you doing now? And all those things. And when I tell them that I'm retired, the first thing that I tell people is I never worked a day in my life when I was in the military. It was this natural thing that I enjoyed so much, that there's sense of belonging, this sense of this is what I'm supposed to do, that it never felt like work. It was just what I was supposed to do. It was like breathing. It really was. And the most fearful day for me was the first day without a uniform on, because I lost that sense of just natural being. And it's a very real thing. There's no doubt about that.
Best job I ever had.
Yeah.
That movie. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's no doubt. So when another one of these traits, I wrote down a couple that I found interesting. You list curiosity as one of the primary attributes. Tell me a little bit about how you define curiosity and why that's so important.
And let me tell you where we came up with these 9 traits. We recently finished a book called The Talent War: How Special Operations and Great Organizations Win on Talent. And we pulled in some subject matter experts, Tracy Kogue, the CHRO of Hewlett-Packard, General Jerry Boykin, one of the initial founders of Delta Force and a 3-star general, Brian Decker, who is the director of player development for the Indianapolis Colts. Prior to that, he was the commander of Special Forces Assessment and Selection, along with a number of business leaders and military leaders. And we came up with this list looking at what all the special operations community look for, both business leaders and military leaders alike. And it's amazing. You remove the domain expertise from anyone's industry, and what makes highly successful people successful is a shared set of attributes. And these are these attributes. But curiosity was one that everyone sort of zeroed in on. And Tracy Kogue said it best. She said the people that last for decades at Hewlett-Packard have this curiosity about them, which ultimately leads into their ability to adapt. But they always are analyzing how things work, not to question anyone or any process, but to truly understand why that process is in place and what the intended outcomes are. And if you have that curiosity of how things work and truly want to understanding it, those are people that will innovate and adapt your processes, your procedures, your services, or your products to keep the organization relevant and moving into the future. And that's why when you hire, that for certain positions, of course, you don't necessarily need that attribute for every position.
Sure.
In certain roles. But when you sort of zero in on curiosity, you're hiring somebody that will be relevant not only in 1 year, but 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line, because they have this ability to adapt to the future market dynamics.
It's so interesting when I perform different types of personality assessments when I'm assessing leaders and things like that. And one of these is a behavioral trait. One of the big 5 behavioral traits is level of curiosity. Are you inquisitive or not, and things like that. And it's amazing to me that the type of leaders that I find that always are successful are almost off the chart in inquisitiveness, right? They have this natural level of curiosity, which has made them successful throughout their careers. But an interesting counterpoint to it is they always are showing less in discipline, and I'm air quoting that, because most people want a disciplined leader in the fact of, hey, if the boss says go and do this, go, I'm going to go do it. I'm not going to question it. Or, they painted the office a certain way. I'm not going to ask why, all of those kind of things. But the realities are that we have found in our research that, someone that is perceived with lower levels of discipline, but with high curiosity is exactly the person that you want, because it's not like they're undisciplined. It's not like they're going to be against you. They're just going to question you. They're going to be the devil's advocate. And any sign of a high performing organization should always have the devil's advocate at the table.
If everyone's thinking alike, then no one's thinking that. I think that was the quote from General Patton. We always need to be questioning why we're doing things. It is very hard, and it takes a lot of emotional intelligence and humility for leaders not to lash out when people question why.
That's right.
And actually reverse, or it's a paradigm shift in how you view when somebody asks that. It's because they actually care. They actually want to know why they're doing the things that they're doing. We saw in the special operations community, either the senior enlisted or the senior officers that they're maybe had curiosity at one point early in their careers that sort of became very rigid. And what would they say? Hey, this is the way we've always done it. That was, if you question anything, hey, shut up. This is the way we've always done it. And of course, the new guy, what do? I shut up and I just go with the flow. Actually, Jim, let me tell you a funny story that Jocko Willink shared. And Jocko's a partner at EF Overwatch. He's also my boss with Echelon Front, he's a leadership consultancy. But he tells the story of really when, and this may have been during your era, when night vision started coming to prominence in SOCOM. And so in the early 90s,
don't be dating me, but yes. Don't be dating, but that's correct. Yeah, version 1.
Hey, own it. Growing older is great. The younger generation, Jocko, because I think he came in 90, was like, oh, this stuff is awesome. And the Vietnam era pushed back. And, I use sort of the gruff voice, like, this stuff is a bunch of crap. We didn't need this in Vietnam. We were highly successful without it. And the younger generation, who highly respected, that's the reason they joined the SEALs or other special operations units, was because of all the lore of what these guys did in Vietnam. They tried to push back and say, hey, Master Chief or Sergeant Major, you guys were highly successful in Vietnam, but hey, this stuff allows us to see in the dark.
That's right.
It's the enemy. And so slowly around, that generation came around to utilizing that technology, but he does talk about the pushback initially when it came to light.
Yeah, the this is the way we've always done it framework, man. That gives me shivers thinking about those days, and I'm glad we have. It's still there a little bit. It's subtle in a military environment, but it certainly isn't as prevalent as it was in the days. But what I think one of the reasons why, and I'd like your opinion on this, is the hot wash, the power of feedback. That when you're done with a mission, everybody taking the name tapes off, popping a beer maybe, but going into the team rooms and debriefing what they just did. And it's usually no holds bar. There's no rank, and everybody gets a voice at the table. Do you remember those days at the table, and do you see value in that?
I'm not going to. I can't say I was highly successful, but I will tell you the keys to my success was that we debriefed everything we did in the military, or what you just referred to as a hot wash, what some people may call an after-action review, or what the private commonly refers to as a postmortem. It was the absolute key to our success. And I tell the story. I work with clients on the leadership side, and I'll tell them about, hey, the amount of discipline and drive that these guys had, and these women, to get better with every iteration in life, that they would go out into the mountains of Afghanistan, all night, get in a firefight with the enemy combatants, eliminate a few Taliban or senior Al-Qaeda leaders, get back at 7 a.m. And then when most people would just go to bed, these people would all, as you say, pop a beer, but I can't condone that we ever had beer.
Beverage of choice. Yep.
that they would go into the team room and that everyone would sit down. And yes, it was no holds barred. It was done in a professional manner. Sometimes got heated, but the fact that these debriefs would sometimes go 2 hours when these men and women are exhausted, knowing that that was the tool through which we got better because we could be going out the next night. What businesses also miss is that they think they have to stand up these elaborate training programs. And after action every day it's cool to develop your people because they learn from other people's mistakes and they have these conversations about making the processes better. You're also developing your people. Not only are you making the organization better, you're maturating your subordinate leaders. Now, I will tell you, Jim, what I most commonly hear from business leaders is, well, Mike, that sounds great. And of course, you guys have the time to do that in the military. And what they're really saying to me is that the development and improvement of their organization and their leaders within that company are not a priority to them. No, we didn't have time in the military, just like you can say you don't have the time in the business world. I could argue to a greater degree we didn't have the time in the military. We made time because getting better consideration was what was most important to us.
Hence the 80% of CEOs saying they don't have the right people because they view time differently. And I would argue, right, you have to have the time. Like time is of the essence to develop leaders and to have these hot washes and after action reviews and all of those things. I mean, it is an absolute imperative. And it's interesting too, because what we find is, I think, is leaders have to have the humility. They've got to be vulnerable to accept, this still stays kind of in the framework of this curiosity, right? To accept the fact that they're going to, go open kimono and say, what have I done wrong? Tell me, explain how we can be better, to have that natural level of curiosity on how to make the team better from even the top. And it's allowing these type of scenarios to happen.
Maybe another way to describe this in the business world, because diversity and inclusion are a big initiative right now. The after action is also a process to reach peak inclusion. As you said, it didn't matter about you. Everyone is entitled to their perceptions or their optics. And when everyone starts contributing, you emphasize this initiative of inclusion.
That's a great point. And to empower people, no matter where they sit within the organization, to have a voice, you will be a high-performing organization if everybody is empowered to raise their hand. And another thing that you brought up is about how you start developing people, how this is inherently educational within itself, because people are watching, right? Those that may be sitting in the back of the room and watching senior leaders have this cuss and discuss kind of scenario. And all of that, they're constantly learning. They're learning from their leaders, and their leaders learn from their subordinates and all of those kind of things. And you will be empowered at a certain point to raise your hand and go, I have a comment. I have a question. And that's some powerful stuff. Powerful stuff.
It is. And before we move subjects, it's critical that the leaders of those divisions, teams, or organizations leading the after action raise their hand and set the example through humility. And I've done it with my young employees. At the end of the day, I said, hey, guys, I made a huge mistake. I didn't think about the secondary and tertiary effects of signing a contract that we now have to break early and pay a few $1,000s. And I want you guys to learn from that mistake, because you're going to be in my position one day. Is you have to be thinking strategically before you take any action. And again, this is your means to pass those lessons learned and to laugh at yourself and create a healthy environment where everyone's getting better.
Yeah, absolutely. Always moving forward. So always moving forward. This is a good segue, I would say. One of these other 9 that I wrote down that I thought were important to talk about as you laid them out, which is almost a topic in itself, is resilience. I'd love your thoughts on how you frame resilience, how you think resilience plays as a key attribute, and is this a natural thing? Is everybody naturally resilient? Are you taught resiliency? How's resiliency play out?
So, I love this one. I think it's one of the primary focuses of special operations assessment and selection, regardless of what community. And in the book, we interviewed a guy named Master Chief Jason Tushin. I love this guy. And what does he do? He does leadership consulting. If you're seeing a trend here, here's my ultimate goal in life. This is my last goal, besides taking care of my family, is to turn EF Overwatch into the number one search firm that provides chief leadership officers or directors of leadership training to every company.
Awesome.
I'm telling you, that's the one. I mean, if you're going to bring in a veteran who has a proven track record of leadership and the experience behind it, you could not make a better strategic move to make your organization stronger. But Jason, who was a master chief of one of the 3 phases in BUDS, in fact, it was the first phase, which runs the infamous Hell Week. And this guy is so humble. And he actually was a tier 1 operator as well. And he doesn't take himself too seriously. But resilience was a big one. And he saw this play out. We attract the special operations community as a whole, whether you want to become a Ranger, or a Green Beret, or an Air Force CCT or PJ or a SEAL. It is a talent magnet. It is one of the biggest challenges for a young man or woman to undertake. And it's not about being physically fit, but when the training starts specifically for the SEALs, you have 250, I call them studs, absolute studs, that have passed some initial gates to make it in. And it's highly competitive to get one of those slots to even try out for the SEAL teams or any other special operations community. But physically fit, they have a high level of intellect because they have to take an assessment called the ASVAB to score a certain score on that test to get in. And some of them are Ivy League graduates. Some of them are NCAA Division I athletes. Some of them are Olympic athletes. And then some played chess in high school or teaching. And naturally, the SEAL instructors, we sort of play this game of pointing out like, oh, that guy's going to make it right there, or that guy's going to make it right there. And we're usually wrong about 90% of the time because we always go in like, oh, that guy played football at Florida State. No kidding. I had one of the starting fullbacks from Florida State in my class. He was one of the first ones to go. Now, the way Gage Institution describes it is the training is designed to push you down to see how you react. It's to gauge your level of resilience. And it's not to crush you or be demeaning, but for some of these amazing human beings that start the training that have never truly been tested, get pushed down multiple times in one day, and they show a low level of resilience and end up dropping on request out of the training. And then that young guy, again, who never played a team sport in his life, that did speech and debate, that we continue to push down and continues to get back up. And that is the level of resilience. But we can all work at resilience. And we're not saying that you get immediately back up when you're pushed down. But everyone deals with trial differently. But you have to step back into the game. You got to keep moving forward at some point. It's like discipline. People think discipline is inherent. It's not. You can work at your discipline as well. If it's getting up early, setting the alarm at 5:30 rather than hitting the snooze, you have to make a concerted effort as a human being to get better, to expand your discipline. And when the alarm clock goes off, you put one foot out of bed, you put the second foot out of bed, you drive forward.
Driving forward, that was another one that you wrote as one of the 9 attributes is drive. And that sounds like that's it, right? That's a part of it, drive. Are you talking when in aspects of drive, is that motivation? Is that just, this forward lean, this natural leaning forward kind of both physically and mentally on drive, the never quit kind of attitude? Is that where you were going when you named that as an attribute?
It is. I mean, drive, let's put it to you this way. Drive is the unrelenting need for achievement and constant self-improvement. It's never accepting the status quo. Now, we have found 2 things about drive. And if you look at business executives, they are high on drive. They are, they do not celebrate. And this was one of my weaknesses, is that my drive was too extreme. And that when we would accomplish something great, my automatic sort of reaction was, what's the next challenge, without allowing my guys to celebrate. You need to allow people to celebrate from time to time. But we've also found You just described, people that are highly successful are high in curiosity but low in discipline. Dr. Josh Cotton, who is a industrial organizational psychologist, he's the one of the main contributors in this book, actually was brought on by SOCOM to assess how special operations and assess and select. And now he's doing it in the business world. And so he runs assessments on a lot of executives. What he has found is that people with high drive also have a bit of narcissism. And let's be honest, a bit of narcissism is okay as long as you can keep it in check. The other thing about driven people, highly successful driven people, is that they're low on empathy. And that's some of the data you've seen. And again, it doesn't mean they're horrible people that just, can't, try to understand the perceptions of others. But when you're in charge of an organization, you are in a position, you are expected to drive results. And sometimes that results in low empathy.
Yep. And I think most people can relate to that. They do see someone out there where they have a sense of bravado, whether it's sensed as cockiness or just high executive presence. It's how you have the maturity to display that and actually be that. But there's no doubt that people could fall into that track of low empathy for sure, because they're so ultra focused. And they must achieve the goal at all costs. And they think that they're hooking everybody up within the organization by being successful. But sometimes, of course, this goes back to human-centric leading. The problem with that is you just leave a trail of tears sometimes when you're that unempathetic.
Yeah, it's a balance. But you said something, Jim, that person thinks they're doing right by the organization and the people in. And I sort of agree with that. If people think I drive them too hard, it's because I want the organization to succeed. When the organization succeeds, the people in it succeed as well. Or the reverse of that is I cannot drive you as hard. I cannot hold such a high standard. And we have 3 consecutive down quarters, and I have to lay people off.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not saying either is right, but my perspective is I'm going to drive you continually to improve, because I don't want to have to put you in a position where I've got to lay you off, because I know that's how you put bread on the table for your people. All I'm asking is for people to start looking at things a bit differently from different perceptions. And I think we naturally criticize people in leadership positions that are there driving results. Have a little empathy for them.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's very easy. I tell people it's very easy to look out the window and point at other people and blame things, but it's more difficult to look at the mirror and see that person first, right? And that, whenever I talk to somebody who is in those mindsets, I'm like, stop looking out the window and start looking in the mirror. And that's the first person that you start to hold accountable, because it's very easy.
Rather than having these, and we have these moments where we step outside and applaud the first responders, God bless. We need to add another 30 minutes onto that, where everyone looks in the mirror in this country and does a brutal self-assessment.
Yeah. Amen. That's 100%. So you mentioned self-assessment. You mentioned some of these fantastic leaders in the field of assessing and the assessment process in special operations. What are your thoughts on kind of in private industry today, the use of assessments? How do you take, on one end of the scale, special operations assessment, where we're putting people in the pool and we're doing underwater blackouts, you're doing all those kind of things, and you're hiking mountains and you're gone for days, sleeping, whenever you can, to the business community and assessing a leader. You're not going to put them in the pool. So how do you properly assess a leader today in private industry? What are your thoughts on assessments?
So when we talk about physical assessments, it is one of many tools in your array of assessment and selection techniques, and they are important. And we even utilize them in the military. So initially people take something called the ASVAB, is to gauge someone's baseline level of intellect. That's a gate. Once somebody proves that they have the ASVAB score to get into the community, that gate is no longer open. We close that and we don't go back and reevaluate that. You have objective assessments and subjective assessments, but we even utilized in correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm going to try to, I think the multi-dimensional aptitude battery 2, the MAB2. So the special operations community, even after we select people into the community, we still take these personal assessments to gauge whether we were right or not. What you're utilizing these assessments to do is really validate the other data that you're receiving from your overall process. And don't necessarily, if it doesn't validate it, it doesn't mean that you naturally throw it out. There could be other factors. There is much like there's no perfect hiring process, there's no perfect assessment. Because if a perfect assessment existed, you don't think therefore people in the field would be utilizing it, and we would forego spending all this money and all this time to gauge people's attributes? No. There are people that will score perfectly on assessments in whatever the range of attributes you're looking at, and their resume will look picture perfect, but then they get on the job and they are the complete opposite. So again, I would say this is, assessments are a tool. Definitely use them. Make sure it measures what it says it's measuring, and making sure that it's measuring something relevant. And that's where a lot of companies don't take the time to look at these different assessments and really ask the question, is it providing us data that is relevant to what we are selecting for? Now, Brian Decker, again, going back to him, he was a lieutenant colonel, the director of player development for the Indianapolis Colts, revolutionized Special Forces assessment and selection, which is a 3-week process. And he started by looking at the assessments that they were doing. And what he determined is that it wasn't really measuring anything of value. And so they had to completely rehaul that program. And because of that, they started to see a higher rate of students moving out of Special Forces assessment and selection and more stepping into the Special Forces qualification course, which is where the real training starts to take place. They're still being assessed. They haven't graduated yet, but he's a perfect example of revamping a process that had been, I want to say, 3 or 4 decades old.
Yeah. I tell you, I hope anybody that's in the talent management field, HR, that's listening out there right now, I hope these last few minutes have been a real foot stomper for you to understand, you gotta measure what is of true value in today's current environment. There's no doubt. And there's many out there, right? They're just measuring to measure, or again, this is how there are just as many CHROs that say that comment that we were laughing at a little while ago about this is how we've always done it, right? There's just as many of those out there in the business world that this is how we've always done it. We've always given them the Myers-Briggs and there it is. And they really don't even know why they're even doing it.
So my co-author, George Randall, has utilized, he's been in talent acquisition for 20 years. The guy is a expert on assessments, and he's never utilized an assessment to rule somebody out or to terminate them from the process. It is another means to gauge the whole man concept, as we call it.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. You know, a lot of these assessments, especially like the competency assessments and also the personality assessments, they just are an indicator on behavioral traits. That's all it is, right? It's a data point on where the person's inclined to behave based off of their personality, their instincts from their DNA. But it certainly should never be the final judgment. It's just, again, we're dealing with humans more than anything else. So, Mike, what?
There's bias in the test. There's bias in every test, and you have to evaluate that as well.
Without doubt. So as we're in this crazy COVID world, we've entered the 4th industrial revolution. We're halfway through 2020. As we look into the future, are there any other competencies that you see that are required to be an effective leader today to lead into the future? Is it these 9 attributes from the book that you're talking about? If you had a chance to go back, it's about to be published. Is there a 10th? Is there something that you reflected on that said may not have met the book's point of view, but this competency is something everybody should think of in the future that we're not thinking of today.
Jim, the best way I can answer that, and this actually is something I've thought about a lot, is the greatest competency we require as a nation to be successful in the future is leadership. 100%, not open to debate with me. It's leadership. And we're not producing that out of our academic institutions or out of our youth as much as we have in the past. And this, as we look at education, one, I think there's something I've called the over-intellectualization of leadership, is that too many people have tried to codify leadership when you can't. We don't have a curriculum, a unified curriculum within our school systems teaching leadership. And I'll be honest, some of these teachers are not equipped to be teaching leadership. Again, this comes back to veterans. If you had one system that talked about humility and empathy and treating people with respect, if you hit all the major principles and we reinforce that, kindergarten through 8th grade and 9th grade through 12th, we would actually increase the overall talent pool in this nation. But we're not doing that. Even in college, one of my mentors, Admiral William McRaven, which you and I know was the SOCOM commander. I think most civilians know him for the "Make Your Bed" speech he gave at a.
That's right.
Actually tried to stand up a leadership curriculum within a institution of higher learning, and it was almost like they had an allergic reaction to it.
Huh.
It was
how sad is that? I will tell you, it's an interesting thing as you were describing it. I think it's an interesting dynamic that as the nation struggles with leadership, I think it's this holistic thing about how there are potentially great leaders that are out there within our boundaries, but the call to public service is so inherently dangerous and unappetizing in today's environment that many people that could be of great service to our nation as a leader just fail to step forward. And that's a shame in itself, right? And you could argue, well, then they're not a great leader because they need to be selfless. But it's interesting that from the earliest times, serving in the community, being a part of a public service organization, learning the simple things of being selfless is something that is less and less out in our communities today.
Jim, I don't want the people listening to this to think that we're saying great leaders, only great leaders come out of the military. That's actually the farthest thing from the truth. Some of the best leaders I've ever met never served a day in the military. But again, if you look back at how they were raised and nurtured, there's common threads that produce these great leaders in our private sector and in government who never served in the military. One of the greatest mentors, and I'm really happy that I got to spend some time with him, was a guy named Bill Campbell. He was the CEO of Intuit, known as the $1 trillion coach or the secret coach of Silicon Valley. And never served a day in the military. And when I had the fortune to sit down with him, the immediate thing that came to my mind is, gosh darn, I wish we had 100 of these guys in the military at our general and flag level, because we would be 100 times more effective. And I've met some great leaders across many industries that just set the example day in and day out, and they live their values.
I tell you, and what a great discussion today. I think for any of us that are listening to this should be inspirational, right? This should be something to where it's a little bit of a slap in the face reminder about, leadership at the end of the day is a lot of the basics. It's about having that drive to just take that step forward, that natural level of curiosity, with high resilience. All of those things that we had this discussion about is in the act of doing. right? Go and do and perform and have the courage to, if you feel like you can't raise your hand, have the courage after you listen to this episode and go to your boss and go, I'd like for you to be aware of XYZ. Or if you're a leader, you go to work next week and you have these open roundtables and say, okay, gloves are off. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Everybody has the same voice, this inclusion. This has truly been an inspirational hour with you, Mike. And I'd love for you to talk again about your book, your upcoming book, the title again, and any last words that you have for our audience.
Yeah, really excited. This is 1.5 years in the making. I would rather deploy another 10 times to combat than
that tough.
Yeah, it was, especially while trying to, start a company, and doing this was, it proved very, very challenging, but very rewarding at the same time. And I've actually changed a few of my stances on parts of the assessment and selection, which were all my ego coming out. But George Randall, the co-author, again, he was an Army veteran, officer, enlisted to officer back in the 80s, 90s, has been in talent acquisition for over 20 years, an amazing human being. And then Dr. Josh Cotton. The book is How Special Operations and Great Organizations Win on Talent. It's going to come out on September 8th. And I think, if anything, companies will reset how they look at talent and the importance of getting this right up front. You and I know, Jim, the cost of a bad hiring program sinks companies. And if you spend a little more money, you can never outspend a good hiring process. Let's be honest. But you'll look at how the special operations community has become very good at this. And one person has even said, I think it was Simon Sinek, said, the special operations community is by far the most high-performing organization in the world. Well, guess what? They don't hire for industry experience. So they've had to become very good at assessing character and attributes in what makes people successful within their domain. And industry experience is not one of them. Last things I'd say, you know what, guys, again, best country in the world, multiply our problems by 5, and we're still the best. We've got our challenges, but guess what? In order to solve challenges, you have to lead, which usually for a lot of people entails checking your ego and removing emotion before you step to the table with civility to find a compromise between two opposing parties, man. And we've lost that. We are not lost. Every generation has their challenges. This country will endure, but we have to start leading to a greater extent, and we have to find a way to get along and compromise.
Mike, thanks for that. Thanks for giving us that last charge for the day, which is never be afraid to lead. And if you're a civilian organization out there, you get those things done right up front. And leadership is the key. Mike, you've displayed that today. Again, thanks for joining our tribe. Great discussion. And I think we're all better for it.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
You bet. Thanks for joining our leadership movement this week. Talking to Mike today about leadership and the attributes we all look for in successful leaders was inspiring and, quite frankly, a call to action for all of us to have this simple, humble statement. Never be afraid to lead. Don't forget our show notes are posted on the website with key leader takeaways. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast and tell a friend so we can continue to build our tribe. Until next time, always remember that iron sharpens iron. Make yourself and others around you better every single day.